look, we've had these moments in the past where we've had an opportunity to be otherwise. You think about the second founding, the Civil War and Reconstruction and Radical Reconstruction. Representative Stevens and others decided to go back to our first works and expand our notion of citizenship, right? In some ways, the modern US nation state was founded in that moment. And we saw an effort, as Du Bois writes in Black Reconstruction, for a genuine multiracial democracy. But what happened in response, right? We got, Jim Crow. We got racial apartheid in the South. We got convict leasing, another form of slavery. So the country doubled down on this ugliness in the face of that effort to imagine ourselves otherwise. In the mid-20th century, we had the second Reconstruction, the Black freedom movement of the mid-20th century, where everyday ordinary people clamoring for full citizenship rights. What did we get in response? We got calls for law and order, laid the foundation for the carceral state. We got the tax revolt in California, which resulted in some ways the shredding of the social safety net, as white Americans said that big government was intruding on their liberty by redistributing hard-earned money from white workers and distributing it to lazy Black and brown people. So those are the two moments that precede this one, and we failed miserably. Here we are in this moment. After electing the first Black president in 2008, the country responded by what? Voter suppression laws, voter ID laws, the Tea Party, the vitriol of the Tea Party, and then we elected Donald Trump. So we're at a crossroads. Who are we going to be? At the heart of it all has always been this moral question. Who do we take ourselves to be? What is a just society? Not a more perfect union, but a just society. And I think that's the broader question that we're grappling with.
So who are we going to be? What is a just society? What does that look like? We are in this moment where people are choosing to take their blinders off to see what many of us have known all along. For too long, the realities and the effects of racism and sexism and toxic masculinity of and on people of color and women have been disregarded. Today, we honor the birth and the legacy of Mrs. Ida B. Wells Barnett. And she said that the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. To move forward, we must speak truth without being labeled as divisive. In 1989, some 30 years ago, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality to help explain how multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage compound to form varying experiences of oppression. And I think about all of the racial equity and inclusion and the diversity inclusion work that has taken place in the last 30 years, and I am perplexed that we are still trying to understand how to center women of color in the fight for equity, or that we are still shouting why our lives should matter and why there is if there's no justice for us, we can't have a just society. While Black women and Black feminists, going all the way back to Sojourner Truth, have always linked racial justice with women's rights or gender equality, the broader feminist movement has not. And we must reckon with that. We must reckon with the fractured relationships within the women's movement between white women and women of color. Angelique Power from the Phil Foundation has a video that she recently released this week called The Death of Equity. If you haven't seen it, search Facebook or YouTube and look at it. It is so moving and powerful. In the video, Angelique says that we haven't achieved equity, not because people don't understand what it is, not because they haven't received countless hours of anti-bias and anti-racism training, attended several workshops on racial justice, and claim that their organizations are doing racial equity work. No, it's just simply not welcomed. And if I can put my own spin on it, it isn't welcome because it means giving up your own comfort. It means not being the center of the solution or change, and therefore perceiving that you won't reap the benefits of progress, and in some way cede a bit of your power, wealth, or your perceived proximity to it. Currently, there is a record 37 women, woohoo, leading Fortune 500 firms. Of these women, just 3 are women of color. and not one are Black or Latina. Of all organizations, for-profit and not-for-profit, of C-suite leaders today, we have 21% that are women, and just 1% are Black women. In 2019, Harlan Alliance published The Gender Disadvantage: Why Inequity Persists. In this report, they stated that women of color fare worse than white women in almost every domain. They're paid less, they have less wealth, more likely to be in low-wage workers, have poor health outcomes, have higher incarceration rates, experience higher rates of domestic violence, and have worse economic outcomes. In Illinois, 15% of women live at or below the poverty line, but for Black women, it is 28.6% and 29% for Latinas. Also in Illinois, 67% of Black mothers are sole breadwinners. This is compared to 18% for white mothers and 26% for Latinas. So you have to just pause for a moment and think about that when we talk about economic justice and we talk about raising the floor and the potential impact we can have on communities if we change just this one thing alone. The Chronicle of Philanthropy released a study in May that stated that nonprofits led by people of color win less grant money with more strings attached. So we get less money and we have to jump through more hoops once we get them. The authors found that white-led groups had budgets that were 24% larger than those led by people of color. They also found that groups led by Black women received less money than those led by both Black men and white women. The sentiment is that when women of color do gain a seat at the table, that is just an illusion of inclusivity, and not because our perspectives and our lived experiences have value. Hell, we are in court fighting for the right to just show up in the workplace or in school wearing our hair in its natural state. For some of us, that means that we have to chemically alter our appearance just to be accepted. Because of this, many Black women are leaving nonprofit and corporate jobs and are now the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs among women, having grown more than 600% between 1997 and 2017. So just imagine the exodus of talent that's leaving the workforce. When Shirley Chisholm, and those that don't know who she is, she's the first Black woman that was elected to Congress, I believe in 1969, but my sisters will correct me if I'm wrong. And she was also the first woman to have a presidential bid. When they asked her why she was running, she said, because in this moment, this country needs the voice of women. And I say that we are once again in that moment where it will take women to heal us and women to move us forward. So what will be our collective voice? Who are we going to be? And how will we do the work to shape a just society? So for all of you that have signed on, thank you for joining us today. I promise you this will be a great conversation. I'm so excited to get into that. I want to thank my esteemed panelists, my sisters, for joining me as we have this brave conversation. As we let you in, if we were in our living rooms, we would be sitting around the living room table and be having cocktails. But as we allow you into our space to help educate, confirm, uplift, and hopefully provide insights as to how we move forward. And I know that's a lot to do in an hour, but you know, we aim high. And for those of you that do not know who I am, I'm Sharita Ellens. I'm the president and CEO for Women Employed. And since 1973, Women Employed has been doing the work to improve the economic status of women and remove barriers to economic equity. I'm not going to get into a whole bunch about Women Employed because I want to have time for my panelists. I will just say that our goal, our ultimate goal, is to influence the systems that have the largest impact on economic equity for women, especially women of color and women in low-paid occupations. So, hey y'all, thank you for coming.
Hi,
Hey.
great to be here.
I'm gonna have each of you introduce yourselves, and as you introduce yourself, please introduce your organization and the work that you all are doing to center women of color. And we're going to do Felicia, Audra, then Karen. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Felicia Davis. I have the honor of serving as the president and CEO of Chicago Foundation for Women, or CFW for short. We are in our 35th year fighting to advance gender equity for women and girls. We believe that when you invest in women and girls, they are catalysts for making the positive changes that we want to see, that we quite frankly need to see in our communities for all of us. An investment in a girl is an investment for all of us. An investment in a woman is an investment for all of us. An investment in a woman of color is an investment for all of us. We have 3 issue areas that we focus on primarily, and those are freedom from gender-based violence, access to healthcare and healthcare information, and economic security and opportunity for women. And we're proud to work with Women Employed, actually all of these organizations, on a number of our initiatives as it relates to economic security. The other thing that I want to say, how we center women of color. I happen to represent the intersectionality that Sharita talked about just a little bit over a year ago. We came in about the same time, I think, Sharita. So just over a year ago, I was appointed by the board, selected by the board to serve as president and CEO of CFW. So my very presence as Black and a woman is intersectional for the organization, but CFW presently supports women of color in a number of different ways. Leadership development is a primary tool. We have Cultivate, which is a phenomenal leadership development program centered on women of color who are already working in nonprofit space to provide them space for their leadership. The challenge overall, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the panel, is that too often women of color, their leadership is challenged and not supported in a way that other leadership is. So we provide space for women of color who are already in the nonprofit sector through Cultivate, and that's a partnership with Crossroads, Woods Funds, the Chicago Woods Fund, the Chicago Community Trust, and CFW. We also are proud a leadership program for Black women, and it's named after Reverend Lily Barrow, a mighty warrior in the civil rights efforts, and in her own words felt that women in the civil rights struggle received the short shrift. True fact, although a lot of the planning was done by women, only one woman's voice was heard that day, and that was in song. So no speeches, no announcements. The women were practically invisible on the stage and on the platform, and too often that happens in life. So in Willie's Warriors, we uplift the leadership of Black women, support them and their journeys, and nurture them and sustain them in the ways that they're not finding either in community or in their employment settings. And then a number of our efforts around economic security and really the breadth of our portfolio really do center women of color in a number of ways. And I look forward to talking a little bit more about the work we do at CFW. Thanks, Sharita.
Thanks, Felicia. Audra?
So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for being here and listening to this today. I am the very newly minted president and CEO of the Shriver Center on Poverty Law as of June 1st. So this is only month 2. I will say that understanding intersectionality is at the core of what we do at Shriver. Shriver Center is an Illinois-based organization with a very broad national footprint that's leading the fight for economic and racial justice. And our organization was born out of the war on poverty led by Sergeant Shriver as part of the Johnson administration and helped create a wealth of programs, including legal services for the poor. So our roots are based in community advocacy and connecting lawyers across the country in these local movements. In a nutshell, we fight with and for people and communities living in poverty and ensure that those most affected by poverty are shaping policies that will have the biggest impact on their daily lives and their futures. So we actually practice 4 interconnected forms of advocacy that drive change at the local, state, and national levels to make equal justice and economic opportunity reality. Our litigation directly addresses laws and policies that stand as obstacles to people striving to live healthy and productive lives. In Illinois, we organize and advance policies that make life better for people in communities that are experiencing poverty. We train lawyers, community organizers, and other activists to build the skills that are vital to equal justice with a focus on racial justice, community power, affirmative advocacy, and leadership development, And interestingly, as part of that, a signature part of that training is our Racial Justice Institute, which is a national leadership program and network of advocates centering racial equity as an integral part of anti-poverty policy and advocacy. And finally, we convene and we connect advocates, community leaders, and activists across the country so that they can share their ideas, their resources, and get the tools they need to work more effectively. Now, I am actually not only the newly minted president, but I'm an alumnus of Shriver. This is where I actually began my legal career. And I had the honor of replacing the person who hired me and my mentor, who was a white male. So just like Felicia had mentioned too, we're talking about intersectionality. This is a huge shift for Shriver to go from being white male led to a Black female. So there are certainly dynamics at play, but I'm very fortunate though to be in many ways coming home, and it feels great. One thing I can say as an alumnus though, is that we did not always filter our work through this lens of racial equity. But it became apparent years ago that we could not truly achieve our mission and serve our communities without acknowledging and addressing directly the inextricable link of racism and poverty. So that's why we are here today. Everything that you've said, Sharita, especially about female heads of household and the disproportionate impact on women of color, and in particular Black and Latino women, is what we deal with intimately, because as we are working in our communities, we are working with many female heads of household. So these dynamics that impact women are very much what we do at our core in terms of addressing. So I also look forward to talking more about the work and answering some tough questions.
Thanks, Audra. And you're doing amazing to have only been in the role for 2 months. So let me just say that.
Thank you.
Karen, we're so excited to have you here today. We don't often, when we are in these spaces of the gender equity organizations, have the opportunity to also sit down with individuals that are leading civil and racial justice organizations. So welcome to Chicago, to the Chicago Urban League. It's been, I don't know, how long have you been there now?
Since January, and I'm glad to be here. I'm glad now that Audra's here. I'm no longer the new kid on the block, but I'm excited to lead the Chicago Urban League. And of course, the Urban League has been in Chicago since 1916, one of the earlier national affiliates of the National Urban League. And we promote racial justice, as you've already intimated, Sharita, and economic empowerment for Black families. But of course, you know that in doing that, you have to do that for Black women. And the way that we fulfill our mission is to pursue a line of programs in workforce development, in entrepreneurship and innovation, in education, and that's really our youth serving arm, as well as in housing and financial empowerment. And quite frankly, that is where we see so many of our women clients. But we also have a leadership program that looks to engage men and women in civic and professional leadership to help them be the next generation of civic leaders. We also have a Research and Policy Institute, and that Research and Policy Institute most recently published a report on the epidemic of inequities, structural racism, and COVID-19. And it really outlined the underlying structural racism that gave rise to the disparities that we saw with COVID-19. But when you talk about how the Urban League supports specifically women, Black women in our case, we really look to one, and it's simple, and you talked about a just society. And most recently, someone retweeted an article that I had written when I was mayor of Gary about the just city. And sometimes that creation of justice comes by providing opportunity. And so a number of our directors at the Urban League are Black women. And, you know, we have a white woman. I mean, so, you know, we don't discriminate. but we create that just institution, and in doing so, through the lens that they use to lead the different parts of the organization, they infuse that sense of fairness, sense of justice for women and Black women in particular through their leadership in the organization. But we also have our Center for Entrepreneurship that support women businesses, and that's important. And then our Center for Student Development that looks to include and provide opportunities for young women who are on the road to leadership, because we know that that is so important. And so the Chicago Urban League understands the intersectionality. Incidentally, I was in law school with Kim Crenshaw, and that's been something she's been doing for a long, long time. And we also understand that it can be both a blessing, but it can also be a burden, because you're really fighting on more than one front, and often fighting to get the seat at the table that Shirley Chisholm referenced.
Well, thank you, ladies, for all that. Let's just get into the conversation. So, all right, so these are no small questions, and we are going to try to answer them as authentically as possible. So when you heard the stats that I shared, or the words from Professor Glaude from his video, what were your thoughts? Like, how did it resonate with you personally and professionally? And how do you reconcile that, right? As leaders of prominent organizations that is in this space of doing this work, and how do we reconcile with our responsibility to make sure that we're moving this work forward, but also we're part of it. We're part of the lived experience. We're part of the biases and the discrimination and the microaggressions and things of that sort. So whoever wants to go first can go first, and then we'll take it from there.
I'll jump in. So I'm jumping in first because you have to understand, I started on June 1st, and this was immediately after the murder of George Floyd. And in that period of time, it's funny, between transitioning jobs, and I had, those few days that you have off between jobs, and I'm gearing up for this amazing new position. That's when just there's complete and total chaos. And so my new team was reaching out to me, and others were reaching out, especially knowing transitioning to a new leader and really needing to hear my voice and to make a statement. And so I walked into a situation where it was intense, and you're doing so in a way that's so impersonal, because we are, having these very intense discussions on Zoom. So it was a very intense period for me. So listening to the video today and the comments, I mean, there's a part of me that just shakes my head and says, it's the same old, but it still weighs very heavily. Like most of all of you from different organizations, and for those of you who are listening to this today, we are in this moment of organizational introspection. For Shriver, we are a justice organization, but it's also important for us to lead with our values and lead by example. But at the same time, we're at this place of personal introspection. So it's very easy to be very detached and thinking as an organization and reevaluating our goals and our objectives, and which is a very important exercise at this time. But what we needed to do internally was just to take a moment and acknowledge the direct impact that this had on us. So we are not immune to the impact of the pandemic or the impact of this racial unrest and uprisings in our city and across the country. And so we had to take some time to really process that at every aspect of our organization. So our relationship with our peers, our colleagues, our supervisors and our supervisees, and even myself as an incoming leader. So in addition to doing that internal reassessment of our work, we really had to think about how can we continue to be as responsive to the needs of the communities that we serve, to be as supportive to them as possible, and to make sure that we're really fulfilling our mission as it needs to be fulfilled, and adapting as necessary. Because as I've said to my staff over and over, there are the things that we want to do for ourselves as an organization, but we also have to be responsive to these external forces that, quite frankly, are dictating, in many ways what we need to be doing. I will say, though, that much of the work of Shriver, though, has not changed over the years. So COVID, for example, has really exposed, the depths of our structural racism and that inequity. And so it's just yet another example for us. So when I talk about shifting, it's not exactly a major shift. I mean, the work has always been there. It's just, how do we prioritize, of the many things that we do, what should be front and center. And the only other thing I'll say too, just as an organization, and like many of our peer organizations, I think that this is a time of it's almost like a cultural flashpoint for us right now. The majority of these frontline workers, the essential workers, the people upon whom we depended when we were at home and working from home, and getting things delivered to our houses, and making sure the garbage was picked up, and all these other essential things were still happening. They were women of color, people of color, low-income people, just folks that we now say, thank you to our frontline workers and thank you to our essential workers. But the irony is, these are the same people who have been demanding basic income supports, access to quality childcare, access to quality health, access to quality education, a living wage. So it's a little hypocritical, quite frankly, for us to be lauding the wonderful things that they've done for our society, and yet by the same token, we are still fighting for just very basic things for them to be able to support themselves and their families. And that, quite frankly, is what really motivates us as an organization and keeps us focused in the work that we do.
Yeah, when this broke down, when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden people understood why paid sick time was important.
Right.
And I'm like, we've been fighting for paid sick time, which we still have not passed, and we will get passed. But we've been fighting for paid sick time forever. It's the thought that you have people out there, that anyone that is working 40 hours a week doesn't deserve the right to be able to take a day off if they are sick, or if their child is sick, without losing pay, without having fear of losing their job. It's mind-blowing that these are fights that we have to put forth for years, right? So we're going to continue to fight for paid sick time and paid family and medical leave, because we understand that. And hopefully these moments make the fight a little less difficult.
Yeah.
Felicia, you want to?
Yeah, I want to jump in, and I want to add to that too, Sharita. Also about healthcare itself, the provision of healthcare being provided through your employer, and not having healthcare that is accessible for everyone. And so many millions of Americans have just lost healthcare. And so what does that mean for us as a country? So I'm going to just keep going back to, who do we take ourselves to be? This is going to resonate with me today. I hope it resonates with those of you who are watching. Who do we take ourselves to be, really? And so James Baldwin someone said, I see what you do. And so I don't necessarily believe what you say, because I see what you do. And so as Americans, who do we really take ourselves to be? When I saw the opening video, I will say, as often as my feeling around these things, is it landing where it needs to land? Are the ears open that need to hear it, and are the hearts open that need to receive it? It's always my thought, because even as we talk about this, as we talk about some of the challenges that we've gone through being Black women, I wonder who is going to say today, and I'm looking at you all, kind of looking at you in the audience, I can't see your faces, who's going to say today, who's going to get defensive? Where is the fragility going to rear its head? And instead of a moment of pause, thoughtful reflection. So when I saw the opening video, that was my wish. That was my silent prayer, almost, let the hearts be open to receive this, and that the information is factual. It's not an over dramatization of what has happened in our history. History is something that we absolutely need to reckon with. And the first step, the first honest step is admitting it, And for all of our allies is saying, I don't know what I don't know, but I have an open heart and I'm willing to listen and I'm willing to learn and to quash, kind of like push down what will happen inside of you to be defensive, because it is not about you. And in order to listen, you have to be willing to cede that these experiences that are foreign to you actually happen, that these things that we tell you and that others have told you have happened, and that the impact that they are saying it has had on them is tremendous impact. And also the fact that they're willing to share it with you, you should take that as a badge of honor, because the reality is we walk around, I can't tell you how many permutations we have to do calculations in our heads every day, just on the intersection of our race and our gender, just about our own safety, just about how am I going to be perceived in this meeting? If I move my hands too much, will I be viewed as too aggressively? And so, these are things we are constantly, Sharita talked about. Is my hair going to be acceptable? If my hair is curly today, if I wear it in my natural state, will that be acceptable? And so all of these things are happening, and a lot of people don't have to do that. They can just get out of bed and show up as who they are and be accepted. And so I think there is this moment of opening and this moment of reckoning where we have to, who do we take ourselves to be? If we are truly an inclusive, equitable society, then we need to accept all comers in a sense, right? We need to open the door as widely as possible and be pulling our sisters with us, and not do what was done 100 years ago when some women received the right to vote.
Right.
Even though Sojourner Truth and all the other Black women who were there lockstep fighting, and this is, we're fighting for that. And when the deal was struck, or as I know a lot of you probably watched Hamilton, streamed it, in the room where it happened, when the deal was struck, Black women were left out on the floor again. And so we are asking right now, and this moment has a reckoning and an opportunity for us to rectify that. So at the foundation, at Chicago Foundation for Women, we have our own reckoning. We have our own reconciliation work that we are doing and have been doing over the years. Our history is very, it's very public. We were founded by 4 white women. And it was a number of our early supporters were from the North Shore and Illinois, and in Chicago, the North Shore is predominantly white and very affluent. And that has a lens to it. And in the creation of things, when you create something, things kind of get seeded in an organization that have long lasting lingering effects, not because of ill intent, just because culturally things are different. It just happens. It is not a blame. It is simply stating a fact. And so as an organization, Sharita, you and I have talked about that, right? My organization was started in 1985. As an organization, we have gone through growth. We are in a state of awakening, and none of you should say you are woke. Please don't do that. Anybody, Black or white, we are all in a state of awakening, because I hate that. We are all continuing to learn and to, as we experience new things, challenge our assumptions and continue to grow, right? And so everyone is in a state of awakening. So as a foundation, we're doing that. We started this anti-racism work, and we're going to be very public about this anti-racism work. It was started before I got in 2018, in the fall of 2018. So the seeds of this started before I came. I came in May of 2019. So I applaud the efforts that were already there. And I'm just building upon those foundations where we were more and more center our decisions and making sure that in our policies, our practices, and the way that we are we pushing out and actively working to be an anti-racist organization and institution. More and more, we need to center the community voice and the residents and communities. Too often, I've said this before when I was in the public sector, people think that communities that have challenges also don't have great resources, great resilience, and also actually have great ideas. And so too often, the people who are the closest, the most proximate to the issue, they understand it the most, but then you have, policymakers or government officials, or quite frankly, philanthropists who come in, who pretend to tell the people whose lived experience is really informed and can inform any strategy what should be done here. And more we need to go in with cultural humility and listen to what they are saying and to complement what they are already identifying as their needs. And so
Yeah.
I look forward to doing that work.
When I heard the video and listened to you talk about the statistics, I just thought about how much of a sense of urgency we all have to have about this work. And as I've listened to people talk since the murder of George Floyd, since the murder of Rashad Brooks, since the murder of Breonna Taylor, there's a different conversation going on that has to make you a bit optimistic. I'm always an optimist, so I'm going to be optimistic, but it's a different conversation that is occurring in different places. And so what I remind our team and those of us who have been engaged in the work, that this is an opportunity to really get some things done. And I even go further to say we have to be disruptive. If we're doing the same thing now that we did a year ago, then we're doing the wrong thing. Because if you're going to get at the root of this, the structural racism, the prejudice and the movement against women, all women, then you really have to look at your underlying structure. Why is it designed this way? You know, who does the interviewing? Who determines who sits on the boards and commissions? Who makes the determination of how people get on the track to the C-suite? How does that happen? And who are the participants in making the choices? It's not that one gender is smarter than the other. It's not that one race is smarter than the other. We know that, but it's the opportunities. And so it's so important for us to think about how you create those opportunities, how you create those pipelines, so that when you see that open up, that you have a diverse group. And it shouldn't be all of one and none of the other from either perspective, but you have to have equal access.
And so, Karen, thank you for talking about that. You do hear urgency in this moment. How do we make sure that it's not temporary? Because in the other two moments, right, that Professor Glaude talked about in his video, there was also urgency.
Yep.
There's been urgency at different points, and we have people that say we have to change, we have to do this. We have so many racial equity statement. Every organization has a racial equity statement, but yet we're still falling short. Right? So the work of change is not happening, or it's happening way too incrementally. And so we have to take this moment where we are in these seats of leadership to force this change.
I think one of the ways that you do it is, no matter how uncomfortable it is, you can't let people off the hook. You know, you're right. There have been so many entities. I've never gotten a statement from Best Buy, and Lord knows I spend a lot of money there, but they had this racial equity statement, but it has to go beyond that statement. And that's both nationally and locally. And, you know, people drop in $1 million. The folks who are dropping it have $1 million to drop. And so it has to go even beyond that. Who are they putting in their boardrooms? How are they changing the structure of their entities?
And even in how much of it is performative. So you have a Walmart who will come out and donate. We're donating millions to this, but you don't want to pay your people a living wage.
Right.
Let alone a minimum wage, let alone a living wage. So your actions, as Felicia said, you know, referencing Baldwin, your actions have to align with your words. And we are in this moment where we're calling for it, for people to align their actions with their words. And we all have work to do in our organizations, right?
Sure.
You know, Women Employed is no different. We were part of that second wave feminism in their article upon article coming out. Even one hit my inbox today, you know, about the problematic issues that women of color are facing in some of these long-standing feminist organizations, and not understanding how you can have a conversation about gender equity and how you can say that you are for women of color, but you won't speak on issues that are impacting us, such as the fact that we're dying as we're giving birth more than anyone else, such as the fact that our children, our babies are dying more than anyone else, such as the fact that when we go to the doctor, they don't want to listen to us because they believe that we don't feel pain, you know, such as the fact that we have housing insecurity, and that we are the group that have the higher incidence of domestic violence than anyone else. So how can you say that those are not feminist issues? They are absolutely feminist issues. And as a part of these organizations, we have to, as Audra said, pause and look at the policies and look at the issues and look at our priorities and say, do we need to make a shift? And what is that shift going to be? And then how do we bring all of our collective power together now that we have this magic? How do we bring it all together to really enact change? So, you know, I'm going to ask you that. So what do you see as the path forward in some of the next steps that we can take?
So Sharita, can I say that I think one thing, first of all, I'm the perennial optimist and glasses half full person. So I'm excited to see so many.
We're all optimists.
Yeah, we are. We have to be. That's the only way.
We have to be. So yes, we collectively are optimists. But because if we were optimists, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't do this. We'd say, what's the point? But I'm really very excited to see as many people who are on this call right now and watching. And I think that's very encouraging. And there are definitely places where I'm seeing people pushing harder in this space, in the philanthropy world, being able to talk to foundations that are starting to even ask, how do we fund the organizations that are doing this kind of work? And how do we loosen some of these restrictions and make it easier for them to do their work and give them more money because they recognize they have to speak up in this space? But one thing I just want to warn our allies and our peers and people on participating today is that, and this is an internal conversation that we have at Shriver as well, the onus cannot fall exclusively on people of color. So while it is really important to make sure that our voices, so both women and people of color, the perspectives that we bring as Black women is very important because we've lived a lot of these experiences either directly or tangentially through family, friends. We've experienced things in ways that our white counterparts haven't experienced them, notwithstanding the fact that Black women especially, I mean, the rates at which we have our associate's degrees and undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees. And so we are highly educated in many ways, and still we find ourselves struggling to have people listen to us and respect what we have to say and take at face value what we're saying, because we're always in this struggle. So, when I talk to my counterparts and peers and how they can support, I said, you know what, you can't put this all on me. We can be here and to inform, but quite frankly, we know what things need to be changed. It's a matter of will, and where is that will? And that's where, our white counterparts and peers have to be willing to step up and to use their privilege and to be able to say, hey, listen, this is not acceptable. This cannot go on. And you can't put that upon me to solve these problems. I'm the beneficiary of, unfortunately, a lot of these problems and these challenges. I'm telling you what needs to happen. But quite frankly, you have to use your voice and you have to use your privilege to push these things through. We can stand side by side. We can be allies and we can be walking through that door together, but this cannot fall solely on the shoulder of people of color. And I just say that to folks who are really listening, because it's really important when people kind of turn to their colleagues and their peers of color saying, well, what do you think we should do? And it's like, oh, and please don't have, I can tell you, but the question is, are you going to do it? Are you going to listen? And to something that Sharita has said earlier, are you not going to be defensive when I tell you what the problems are?
Right.
Are you not going to be defensive when I tell you what you need to do, and that you have to be willing to be uncomfortable? As Black women and as Black professionals, we are so used to, and not just Black women, many professional Black people, many professional people of color, we're used to being the only in the room, the only one, espousing these things in a sea of white. We're used to this. But a lot of my peers aren't used to being uncomfortable, and they're not used to having these uncomfortable conversations, and they want to fix things like that. And if it were that easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. So you have to be willing to be uncomfortable.
Betsy Hodges, the former mayor of Minneapolis, wrote a New York Times op-ed about the responsibility that white people have right now.
Right.
And I mean, she didn't just start talking that way. She has always talked that way. And I think it's worth taking a look at.
Yeah.
And I want to add too, one of the things for allies out there, for white allies, please, and this isn't so what I believe and what I've experienced, but also something that Melanie Hobson, I think she gave a whole TED talk about this. Stop saying that you don't see color. And I know you mean it in the most, like, to say that I think that all people are equal. And I understand the place, because some of my closest white friends have said that. And I have to stop and say, don't say that, please. What Melody said in her speech and her TED talk was that we need you to see color.
You have to see
and
it.
She asked that everyone be color brave. So what can you do? Look around and see, because if you actually start looking for color, you will see what Sharita started with, those statistics. Oh my gosh, my office, my team, my floor, my section, my department, fill in the blank, so forth and so on, does not have this type of diversity. We're kind of homogenous, or we're sort of with one or two chocolate chips mixed in. That's not a good cookie. I don't want that. I want a lot of it mixed in so that we can have flavorful. I don't want to be the only chocolate chip in the kind of like cookie dough. So please, one, you need to see color. You need to have, and don't say, oh, I can't discriminate against white people if I start recruiting for jobs. Well, I'm gonna tell you something. We have been discriminated against in the past. It's not discrimination. You are trying to build equity. You are trying to be inclusive. So that means you have to overcorrect. You have to overcorrect to get the true result that you're looking for. So in hiring decisions, I've led a lot of teams, and I've been very clear to my teams and saying, everybody says we want the best and the brightest, this meritocracy. And someone, I saw a panel yesterday, someone talked about this. Inclusion and diversity will beat meritocracy every single day, because what we have done with all of this merit, the best and the brightest, someone once said it's always the best and the whitest. And that was in response. That was at a board hearing when I was in the mayor's office. An alderman said, no, I'm tired of hearing this, because it's always, we couldn't find anybody. Do the homework, and don't just depend on people of color to do the homework for you. You don't know where to find Black engineers? Google, where are Black engineers graduating from? What colleges are producing engineers or in large numbers? When you Google that, you'll have that information. And then what you do is you go to that college, university, you build a relationship, and you build a pipeline. And you can do that for fill in the blank for anything, actuary, accountant, I don't even know, all the careers,
every field.
Every field. You can do that. It's not enough to say, well, we posted it and people didn't come. It's very difficult. I don't think people understand. It's very difficult sometimes. These organizations, including my own, at some point, people will say, like, you feel like a closed organization. How do we get opportunity? How do we get access? We have to open up those opportunities. The other thing that you can do is, where are you spending your dollars? So as a foundation, we're a community foundation. Last year, we gave $2.8 million in grants. We also spent $1 million in our operations. And so I said, we're going to publicly state how much of that money is going to women and people. We are a women's foundation, it's in our name, and people of color. And last year it was 57%. Now I submit to you, we should probably be at 70%, but at least now we measure it. And we put that information in our annual report. So if you don't know where to go for a person of color or a woman who does graphic design or who does event planning or who is a consultant, and fill in the blank, because we hire a lot of consultants. If you don't know where to go for that, you can start there. You can also start at, there are so many organizations. You can start at the Urban League.
Sure.
There are so many organizations
We have a list.
that collect this data and have the list. So stop saying like, I can't find people. You know, if you're a lawyer and you're like, oh, we need more diversity on our board, and then I say non-lawyer diversity, so I'm not even making it about race. So you're a lawyer and you say we need non-lawyer diversity on our board, but then you tell all your lawyer friends that you need people on the board. Well, lawyers know lawyers, so you have to go to where you can find people. So these are actionable steps that everyone can take in their organizations. Be mindful about where you're spending your money. So for us, it's not just about the grants, it's about what we spend in our operations. And it's also, where is our money at play? Where are we banking? What relationships? How
Very
can we
true.
open those relationships to other? How are we investing? Are we investing in a way that's equitable? Are we investing in a way that centers gender? Are we investing in a way that takes account racial equity? Like all of these, how is our money being activated? And so for all of you, I would say, see color. Stop saying I don't see color. Start, and then you'll start seeing the absence of it. And then, as Melanie Hobson said, be color brave, and then do something about it.
And just take the steps, right? Just take the steps. Stop waiting for the silver bullet. Stop waiting for this big master plan to come down. Know that each and every one of you have power within your own sphere of influence to do something. Know that every real social justice or a civil movement that started, it started with everyday, ordinary people.
Absolutely.
It did not start with these leaders out here that we put all of our trust in. It started with everyday people. So you have the power to do that. Just take the steps. Look into your own organizations. How can you hire more? Publish, you know, your not just your senior leadership roles, but everything.
Yep.
Be more intentional about bringing more women of color onto your boards, and not to stop recycling the same 5 Black and Latina women. Like it's not a whole bunch of us out here that can do the work.
There are more.
There are more, and we are all very qualified to do these jobs. So, you know, take those necessary steps. Continue to have dialogues like this, and open up your own organizations in your own homes and host your own conversations, so that you know you can be enriched with this information and just begin to be more comfortable having these conversations. It's the only way that we move forward, if we begin to normalize the talk about justice and make injustice and discrimination and sexism the oddity, where people began to feel uncomfortable to voice those type of opinions, to exhibit those type of behaviors, because they are going to be shunned. That's where we need to go. Karen, I'm sorry. And
No, you're right. I'm agreeing. And you know, you think about it, people always talk about peer pressure as being a negative thing, right? But there's positive peer pressure. And what you just gave, Sharita, was an example of how you can pressure your peers in the right direction. You know, one of the things that has been so disconcerting in this day and age with the dialogue that comes out of Washington so often is that there are things being said that for so long were unacceptable, that you might have thought it, but you would never say it on national media, you would never say it in social media, and that has been moved away. Now, in some instances, that's bad, but I think for so many of it's good, because you see that people still think that way. So there was this Band-Aid over that thinking, right? So now we have to get at the core of it. The other thing that I would say is that if you think about how do we come against this, it's really thinking about how you remove this racial wealth gap. How do you allow people to build generational wealth? How did they do that? Through housing. They do it through businesses, the
Insurance.
creation of businesses, through having jobs that will allow them not to live paycheck to paycheck, but to make a living wage, not just the minimum wage,
Right.
and that will allow them to amass that wealth and to pass it on to the next generation. And it's not always about getting a college education. I think it's important. We have one, obviously. I encourage my daughter to get one, but I know there's some folks that don't have college educations who make more money than I do, and who have more wealth because they don't have that college debt. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
No debt. Absolutely.
Women are outpacing men when it comes to degree completion, and Black women in particular, but they also carry the majority of student loan debt.
Because
Yeah.
we don't have the wealth going into it.
That's
So
it.
we are investing, right? We look at education as an investment and we take that debt on because we don't have the wealth. We don't have the college savings,
Or the network, right?
or the network to be able to do that. Okay.
Right.
I know we're supposed to be ending.
We're way over time.
It's like,
This is never going to work with just an hour.
it went so fast. So I just thank you guys for, sticking a little later. For everybody that is still on, that have not switched over to join the virtual networking, I want you to know we're going to be continuing these conversations. Thank everyone for coming out, and just have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.